For your home learning activity, I would like you to watch the following video in preparation for the next lesson. It is recommended that you make notes and any questions that you might have for next lesson. This topic will focus on various types of businesses that can be established in the UK. The types that you must learn are sole traders, private limited companies, public limited companies. You must also be able to differentiate between the private sector and the public sector. And some of the key terms that you must be able to understand and then include in your written responses are the terms unlimited and limited liability, ordinary share capital, market capitalisation, and dividends. During this video clip, I will also cover the role of shareholders and why they invest, and I will also look at the influences on share prices and what can influence the change in a share price. The most common and easiest business to start up in the UK is what is known as a sole trader. A sole trader is one individual who runs the business and makes all the decisions. That individual can employ others to work for them, but it is always one individual. Establishing a sole trader business is quite simple. It can be done online by registering with Her Majesty's Revenues and Customs. A sole trader pays normal income tax like they would if they were in any other employment. The main disadvantage of being a sole trader is what is known as unlimited liability. Unlimited liability is an important concept in business studies, and it is something that I will cover in this video later on. We're now going to introduce you to Mr. T. Walker, who is looking to establish a window cleaning business in the local area. Morning, Trevor.
Morning, Rod. How you doing?
I understand you've come for a little bit of advice of starting up your own business today.
Indeed. I'm due to start up, or I'd like to start up a window cleaning business, and I just wanted to know a bit of information because I know there's sole traders and I know there's limited companies, but I don't really know the difference between them.
Okay. Well, the easiest and the quickest method of starting up your own business would be to register as a sole trader. It's fairly straightforward. You can do it online. You just need to register with Her Majesty's Revenues and Customs. Are you aware of what being a sole trader means, Trevor?
No, it's just a term that I've been told, but that sounds like it's quite an easy thing to do.
Basically, a sole trader means that it's a business that is run and controlled by just one individual. So in this case, it would be you. You are obviously eligible to hire other people. You're allowed to hire as many people as you want, if that's something that you were looking to do maybe further down the line. But otherwise, it's your own business. You work for yourself. You pay income tax, so you don't pay tax like all these other big businesses. You just pay income tax, which is the same as you would pay if you were in any other form of employment. You get to make all the decisions. You get to work when you want. You get to keep all the profit. You can have holidays when you want. There'll be no one to argue with, no disagreements, because you'll be basically your own boss. Does that sound good, Trevor?
No, that sounds good. I've worked for other people before, and I really want to have a business. It's just me making all the decisions and taking home all the money.
Okay, that's great. How do you intend on funding the business, Trevor?
Well, I've got a couple of £1,000, but I probably need 3,000 or 4,000 more to buy a vehicle and all the equipment that I'm going to need.
Okay, well, it's great that you've got some savings behind you. I mean, would you approach the bank for the remainder that you need?
I was thinking of the bank if possible.
Okay, well, like you said at the start, there are other business forms that you could establish, as sole trader is one of them, but this is the one that the bank deems slightly riskier than, for example, a limited company. So you might struggle to obtain large sums of finance at the start. So you may have to go to family and friends to borrow the remainder. It's probably something that you'll need to chat to your bank with.
Right.
Are you aware of why the bank might consider a sole trader to be a bigger risk than, for example, a private limited company?
Is it just because it's just the one person it's reliant on?
It's all to do with this liability, it's called, Trevor. Being a sole trader, you would have unlimited liability, which could actually mean that you risk losing your own possessions should your business fail.
Right. That sounds quite serious.
So, are you a homeowner, Trevor?
I do have a house, yes.
Okay. So let's just say that your business failed, which, hopefully you are given enough advice so it doesn't, but should it fail and you are left with debts to pay, because you're a sole trader, it means that you and the business are the same. Does that make sense?
Yes, so that means that if the business goes bankrupt, I'm liable for it and responsible. Is that right?
That's correct. So if you had, for example, £20,000 debt when your business went bankrupt, you would still have to pay that £20,000 because it's in your name. So therefore, you might be forced to sell your house, like you said that you're a homeowner, to pay the debt, or any other possessions such as vehicles or anything else that could cover the debt.
Right. That's something that I have to put a bit of thought into.
Yeah, this is obviously the main disadvantage with sole traders, this unlimited liability concept. However, there are other alternatives for you to avoid this scenario, which would involve going down the route of registering as a limited company. But this might be something that you want to have a look into yourself.
That's fine. I shall do a bit more research. But thank you for the information on sole trader. That will really help with my research into the new business.
No problem, Trevor. Any other questions regarding sole traders?
No, I think you've covered off everything. Thank you very much, Rob.
Okay, thank you.
Having covered sole traders, we will now look at PLCs, which stands for Public Limited Company. Okay, so what is a public limited company? Well, basically, a public limited company is owned by shareholders. What's a shareholder? Well, a shareholder is anyone who invests into a business. PLCs are therefore owned by shareholders, but run by directors and then managers. Some examples of the largest or large UK PLCs are HSBC Bank, Tesco, Vodafone, Marks and Spencer's. To set up as a PLC, it's more difficult and a lengthier process than sole trader. To establish as a PLC, you have to be worth at least £50,000, so you have to be able to issue shares to the value of £50,000. To register, you must send documentation to Companies House, and also being a PLC, you are more scrutinised, so you have to publish your accounts at least every year, so therefore you have to disclose to the general public how much profit you've made, what your cash flow's like, etc. An advantage of being a PLC is that they have what is known as limited liability. This means that the business and the owners are completely separate. This is known as incorporated. The positives for the owners of being incorporated are, should the business go bankrupt, the owners will only lose the money that they invested. So any other debts they will not be responsible for, because the business and the owner are completely separate and they have their own legal entity. PLCs have what I say is called limited liability, which is the opposite to a sole trader. A disadvantage of a PLC, though, apart from having to publish accounts and it being a lengthier process, is also the fact that it is easier for another business or individual to take over the business, because they would only need to acquire 51% to be able to take hold of the business. You might ask yourself, how do you buy shares in a public limited company? Well, public limited companies float their shares on what is called the stock exchange. So in England, it's the London Stock Exchange. So anybody over the age of 18 can buy shares in a public limited company. So public limited companies, their shares are listed and anybody can buy these shares. Another company in the UK, other than a public limited company, is what we call a private limited company. We abbreviate private limited companies as LTDs. So an LTD is a private limited company. There are some differences between private limited and public limited companies, and there are also some similarities. Private and public limited companies are both owned by shareholders. The main difference is that shares in private limited companies are not issued or are not available for sale on the stock exchange. So this means that the general public can't just purchase shares in private limited companies such as John Lewis, Virgin Atlantic, Arcadia Group, or Stevens Accountants, which is actually Pontefract based. To be able to buy shares in this company, you have to be invited to do so, usually by the owner or the other shareholders. So that's the main difference. A lot of local businesses set up as private limited companies, so local car garages, window cleaners maybe, establish themselves as private limited companies. The reason that they do this is because they also have limited liability, the same as public limited companies. So it basically means should the business go bankrupt, the shareholders have their own entity and are separate from the business, so they can only lose what they invest. Limited companies take longer than sole trader businesses to establish, as they too have to apply and register with Companies House. So it does take a little bit longer to establish. One of the benefits of being a company such as a private or a public is that you have greater access to funds. So the bank is actually more willing to lend you money if you are an established company. We'll now summarise the difference and the similarities between these two businesses. Okay, so we're just going to summarise now the differences and similarities between a private limited company, abbreviated as LTD, and a public limited company, abbreviated as a PLC. It's important that you don't get mixed up between these two, okay? So it's a public limited company and a private limited company. Alright, so, similarities. I'm going to start with the biggest similarity and the biggest advantage of establishing this type of company. The similarity and the biggest advantage is the fact that they both have limited liability. So what does this mean? Well, it basically means that the business and the owners are completely separate. So, in a sense, the business is its own person and are separate from the owners. When this occurs, it's known as incorporated. So it basically means that the business has its own legal entity. So, for example, on the previous slide, I introduced you to some examples of public limited companies. One of these was Tesco. So, if Mr. Smith was to go to Tesco and he was to slip on a wet surface and break his arm, and he decided to sue the business, it would be Tesco PLC versus Mr. Smith. Because Mr. Smith is suing the business, not the owners, because they are completely different. So that's the biggest similarity between the two. The other similarities are that they are both owned by shareholders. They can both find it easy to obtain finances. So the banks, for example, are actually more willing to lend money to companies such as private and public rather than sole traders. So these are some similarities. The other one is obviously the registration process. For both types of businesses, you have to send off lots of documentation to Companies House before you can actually be established and up and running. So these are the main similarities between these two types of business. You can purchase shares in both. However, the process of purchasing shares in these two companies is slightly different, and I will discuss that shortly when I look at the differences. But from this presentation, the main points I'd like you to take away and learn is this concept of limited liability. Okay, so that the owners can only lose what they invest into the business. So if Tesco, for example, was to go bankrupt, the owners would only lose the money that they invested at the start. They would not be responsible for any debts that Tesco might have. And also this point, or this key term, incorporated, which means that the business is separate from the owners and it has its own legal entity. Okay, I will now look at the differences between a public and a private limited business. Okay, so I've covered the similarities between public limited and private limited. I'm now going to explore some of the differences. Okay, so the main difference between these two types of business is that a public limited company sells its shares on the stock exchange. This means that it's available to the general public. So anybody over the age of 18 can actually buy shares in a public limited company. Okay? In the UK, the stock exchange is known as the London Stock Exchange, abbreviated as LSE. So all your big UK companies that are PLC'S, Tesco, Marks and Spencer's, Barclays, HSBC, they sell their shares on the London Stock Exchange. So you can go on there, you can find out how much one share costs, and you can purchase these shares without anybody refusing to sell you them. However, with a private limited company, you have to be invited to purchase shares. So usually what you find is that a private limited company is actually owned by family and friends. So it's often family and friends that establish a private limited company, and then they can invite other people to purchase further shares. So that is the main difference between these two. So you cannot buy shares in a private limited company on the London Stock Exchange. Only public limited companies. Okay? Right. So one of the disadvantages of this is that you might argue that a public limited company has greater access to finances because they can raise more money a lot quicker than a private limited company. So you might say that a public limited company is therefore able to grow quicker. This isn't always the case, as there's obviously lots of large private limited businesses in the UK. But on the whole, PLCs often are able to grow quicker because they can generate funds from the sale of shares a lot quicker. Just a key term to introduce you to is that the selling of shares and the finance raised from it is known as share capital. Okay, another difference is that they both have to publish accounts, but a PLC has to publish more. So, must publish more detailed information. Some of the information they have to publish is things like balance sheets, profit and loss accounts for the year, so people can actually identify if they made a profit or a loss, what dividends they paid the year before, etc. So they are the main differences between a PLC, public limited company, and a private limited company, an LTD. So here is a summary of what I've just discussed and gone through on the board. So it summarises the differences here between unlimited liability and limited liability. So it covers this concept of what liability is, which is obviously all to do with if you have unlimited, it means that you can actually lose your personal possessions, which would apply to sole trader businesses and partnerships. And then we have limited liability, which applies to companies such as public and private limited companies, which means that the owners can only lose what they invest. This is a massive advantage in business to have a limited company due to the fact that your personal possessions aren't at risk. Another area that needs covering is what is known as the public sector and the private sector. This is completely different from a public limited company and a private limited company, which we've just looked at. Okay, so don't confuse the two. To make it simple for you, I've put some information in the table below, some business logos to try help you identify the two. So public sector is basically any organisation that is run and controlled by the government or the local council. So it's government services. So these are things such as the NHS, the army, the police, education in public schools, local leisure centres. These are all controlled by the government, so they are public sector. They're basically there to provide services for us not to make a profit. The private sector is run by private individuals or groups, usually as a means for profit. Okay, so these are not owned by the government. So any businesses that you have interaction with on a daily basis will be in the private sector. So any businesses that are sole traders, any businesses that are public limited or private limited that are owned by shareholders, so private individuals or groups are in the private sector. So your Sainsbury's, your Tesco's, your BT, your Sky, your private gyms, these are all in the private sector. Okay? So just remember, public sector, government services, private sector, basically private businesses run by individuals or groups. Okay, so I've just explained the public and the private sector to you. Another key term that you must understand in business studies is this term privatisation. What it basically means is that businesses can transfer from the public sector, so those controlled and run by the government, into the private sector, so they become owned by private individuals or groups. When this happens, it's known as privatisation. So if a business goes from the public sector, so government owned, into the private sector, then this is known as privatisation. Once it enters the private sector, it doesn't matter if it's a PLC or an LTD, this is completely separate. It's still a private business, so it's a private sector business within the private sector. A recent example of a business that transferred from the public sector to the private sector is Royal Mail. So previously Royal Mail was owned and controlled by the government. However, it is now a PLC, so it now belongs in the private sector. Here you can see a newspaper article from the Telegraph, which was dated October the 11th, 2013. And this is when Royal Mail shares were sold for the very first time. They were sold on the London Stock Exchange, so therefore they are a public limited company. And on the first day that they became available, this is known as a flotation. So the very first time that businesses' shares appear on the stock exchange, this is known as a flotation. Hence the heading Royal Mail Share Float. So what is market capitalisation? Well, market capitalisation applies to public limited companies, PLC'S. And it basically tells us the value of all the business's shares combined. If you ever get asked this question in the exam, you should be able to work it out using the following calculation. So to work out market capitalisation, all you need to do is the current share price times the number of shares issued. So if you do this sum, this will give you the market capitalisation figure. Individuals buy shares in companies mainly for financial gain. So they're looking to increase the amount that they've invested. So what they are hoping for is that the value of the share will increase. So if I was to buy some Tesco shares at £3.20 today, and next week I check and they've gone up to £3.50, I might sell them, and then obviously I have made 30p on every share that I have purchased. Another reason why individuals invest in businesses and become shareholders is because they will receive a share of the business's profits, usually at the end of the year. Some businesses might issue it every 6 months, and what I would receive is what is called a dividend. So dividends are paid to shareholders from the profits that a business makes. So it's a bonus to the shareholder, it's a reward. Dividends will obviously increase and decrease each year depending on the success of the business. I will now show you a worked example of dividend payments. I'm just going to explain to you the process of dividend payments. Okay, so a dividend, like I said on the previous slide, is a bonus paid to shareholders. So this bonus is paid out of the profits of the business. Usually a shareholder will receive this bonus once a year, although some businesses will pay this every 6 months. Okay, so a dividend. If a business has a successful year, the dividend will be higher than if they had a poor year. Okay, so for example, if I bought 100 shares in Tesco, I would be a shareholder and I would own 100 shares. Bob might purchase 50 shares in Tesco. He's still a shareholder. When it was time for the bonus, we would both receive a dividend payment. Tesco would decide how much they pay per share. So it might be that they decide that they will pay 50p per share. So I would receive the same dividend payment per share as Bob would. However, I would obviously receive a larger dividend payment because I have 50 more shares. So I would receive 50p for every share that I had. So it would be 50p times 100 because I have 100 shares. So therefore my bonus from Tesco would be £50. Bob, on the other hand, would still receive 50p per share, but his dividend would be less because he has 50 less shares. So his dividend would be 50p times 50, so he would receive £25. And that is what a dividend payment is. It's what shareholders receive as a bonus, and it's paid per share. I would still own the 100 shares, okay? So I would still own the 100 shares. This would just be my bonus, my reward from the business's profits for investing in the business.
I have discussed shares and investing in businesses by purchasing shares, but I just wanted to show you a quick photograph or a clip of where you might come across various business share prices. So remember, share prices listed are obviously public limited companies. You can find these online, in newspapers. So this little clip is taken from a newspaper, and it shows the share prices of various businesses, and they are split into what sectors they operate in. So here we can clearly see that businesses are grouped into retailing. So we can see Morrison's, we can see Next, we can see Sainsbury's, and these basically help us to see what the current share price is. So if we take Tesco down here, okay, the price is always quoted in pence. So for one Tesco share, currently on here it would be £1.76.5 because it's 176p, so it'd be £1.76.5. So this is just a little tip on how you go about finding share prices should you ever wish to check the price of any shares that you might have purchased. Share prices move regularly throughout the day, even every couple of seconds, so they never stay the same. Obviously, if we are an investor and we've purchased shares, we want the share price to increase. However, this doesn't always happen, and they can move in the opposite direction. So what might cause a share price to increase or decrease? Well, there's lots of different factors. If a business has a very good year, and it publishes this and it's revealed, then it could push the share price up. If a business is being talked of maybe being taken over, it could move in either direction depending on who the other business were that were taking it over. So this one could influence it either way. The economic environment that the business is operating in, okay? So is that industry growing? Is the UK economy in a recession, which might push the share price down? Or are we in a boom, which might increase the share price due to the fact that the product might be in more demand? Publicity is also another factor, as well as ethical behaviour. So if the business is doing good things and it's investing maybe in community projects and it's getting positive media reviews, this could increase the share price. However, ethical behaviour and negative publicity can cause a business's share price to slump. A perfect example of this, and one what I'd like you to do a little bit of research on before next lesson, is Volkswagen. They were involved in a scandal recently which wiped a hefty proportion off the share price. Can you find out what the scandal was? Just to highlight, there was a scandal involving Volkswagen. Here are a couple of newspaper articles that I've found. The actual scandal has been referred to as Volkswagen Dieselgate, as can be seen in this article here, which is taken from the Top Gear website. So do some research, see what information you can find on this, and bring it with you to next lesson.